So this is one of those servants that really gets a lot of what I would consider unneeded hate because people kind of misunderstand what this servant is trying to do. They try to grab Osaka Archer and just become a big beef stick, right? They compare her to people like Gilgamesh, Ishtar, Tesla, all these other big, chatty AoE 5-star archers, and they're like, why isn't Osaka doing the damage? And they kind of forget that Osaka, unlike a lot of these other servants, well, kind of unlike them, because Tesla's starting to kind of become a pseudo support as well, but unlike them for the most part, she actually leans a lot into the support aspect and is kind of like a pseudo buffer slash pseudo DPS type servant. So the reason she doesn't do as much damage as a lot of these other guys is because a lot of her value comes from the fact that she makes the entire party that much stronger. So we're going to talk about her in today's video. This is a servant that I'm really excited to talk about because I just recently, as you guys saw, got her at NP2 so I can actually finally use her. So I'm positively busting at the streams just trying to get to talk about this lady. But before we begin, make sure you leave a like, you subscribe for that daily FGO content, and if you want more content, I stream every weekday over on my Twitch, which is linked down in the description down below. Now, with that being said, let's start off by talking about the good old girl's hits, which you may see something a little bit odd here because she's supposed to be a Buster servant, so you may be asking yourself, why does this Buster servant have 3 arts cards? Well, it's the same reason someone like Emiya has 3 arts cards, right? Although, unlike Emiya, she doesn't have the ability to change her NP, but we'll talk about that later. The idea behind this is that she has a triple arch deck so she can more easily get to her NP because, spoiler alert, she doesn't have anything to buff up her natural NP gain. She doesn't have like a big, fat, juicy battery, so she can't just shotgun her NP, so she needs something else to help her get to that NP more consistently. So with a triple arch deck, that not only means you're going to find her arts cards more often in your Brave Chains, but it means she can actually do an Arts Brave Chain with herself, which is really strong because, as you guys know, an Arts Brave Chain at bare minimum is going to net you 20% NP just for doing an Arts Brave Chain. It also is very good for helping your other support casters, which the primary support caster for Osakabehime right now is going to be someone like Merlin, who's also rocking a triple arts deck, meaning you should have a very easy time just overloading Osakabehime with NP because her arts cards are always going to be readily available. And the NP gain is not too bad at 0.62% and 3 hits a pop. Now, unfortunately, these would be very, very good with crits, but if you're not using her with someone like Merlin or another servant that's a dedicated star gen, or can at least play the role of a star gen as they do other things, you know, someone along the lines of maybe like Emiya, who could just turn his own NP into a star bomb, she's really going to struggle because that is the one thing going into this Osakabehime video, is that she is a little weak because she wants to be this like crit servant slash support crit servant right at the same time, but she doesn't really have a way to provide stars for the party, especially because she's rocking a triple arts deck, and as you guys know, arts cards are notorious for having the hardest time genning stars. It's just the one detriment they have, so unless you're using someone like Lady Crane or Caster Gilgamesh, you know, you're going to have a bit of a hard time causing them to drop stars, and she's not really doing herself any favors with only having an 8% star gen stat. They did give her a 4-hit quick card, but that's not going to be enough to provide stars for the entire party. Now, if you're going to double Merlin it up, you know, you're going to give 2 Merlins to Osakabehime, they can pretty much just circle jerk their NPs and drop infinite stars for her to play around with. But then you're also not kind of using Osakabehime to her full potential, where she's supposed to be kind of providing buffs to the entire party and being a pseudo buffer, right? So a bit of weird stuff going on with Osakabehime, but at the bare minimum, they gave her that 5-hit extra attack, which you guys know that I like to see, because the extra attack, if you don't know, let me inform you, is a composite card that gens stars NP and does big boy damage, and 5 hits is that chef's kiss golden standard. But let's go ahead and move on into the skills, because her skills are actually pretty good. Starting off with skill 1, she's going to give herself 50% crit damage for 3 attacks that last for 3 turns, and 1 hit of evasion that lasts for 1 turn on a 5-turn cooldown. This is probably the most annoying thing that she does, is having these both be hit-based, when a lot of servants that get crit damage buffs for themselves nowadays give themselves at bare minimum that 50% for free for 3 turns, or you're like, say, Morgan, where you only give yourself 30%, but you do like 7 other things on that skill, so it's kind of worth it, right? This just seems to be a little dated. I understand why they were apprehensive to maybe just give her the flat out 50% for 3 turns, because spoiler alert, her NP is going to be giving back a lot of that crit damage. So maybe they didn't want you to be able to stack it too quickly, but this is something that is going to age a little bit, with a lot of more modern servants getting 50% for 3 turns just off the gate for free and not being restricted to just a mere 3 attacks. Because if you don't know, the reason this is a little bad is that you can burn all of those attacks on the first turn, and then let's say you get some of her other cards on turn 3, you no longer have access to those cards, right? You just can't use those anymore. Or if you're using like a Summer BB setup, it's not possible, because Summer BB will lock your cards into place, but then you only really get that turn of really good crits, and then you're going to be reliant on stacking the crit buff from her NP, which just can, you know, as you guys see, kind of spiral out to being not as good as if you were using a different servant, right? So I see what they were going for, but it's a little bit of a shaft. At least it's 1 hit of evasion, though, as far as the defense side is going. That is enough for her to dodge an NP. That's pretty good, I suppose, although Merlin usually has you covered with his AoE nope skill on skill 2, but still nice for her to have her own method of survivability, and it doesn't really conflict with anything else. I do like that, because as you guys know, with servants like Jack or Raiko that have their damage steroid tied to their evasion, it can get a little dicey sometimes where you're trying to be like, oh, do I want the damage steroid, or do I want to save this dodge or invincibility for later? At least this is tied to her crit damage, which I guess is a little flexible, I suppose, being hit based. I guess that's kind of one of the positives you could take from that, and it gives her an ability to dodge an NP. So kind of a little bit of a rough start, but I promise things get better from here. Moving on to her second skill, this one is pretty good, as it's going to function as a charisma for the party, giving them 20% attack for 3 turns, and giving them ignore evasion for 3 turns as well. This is a really good reason why Osakabehime can be a very good tech choice for a lot of those more annoying boss battles where the boss might give themselves like 20 hits of evasion like William Tell does in Lost Belt 4. You can just bring Summer Osakabehime and pretty much have your entire party just completely bypass that, right? It's very useful for those bosses that give themselves these annoying, unremovable buffs where usually you could just bring someone like Shiro Amakusa and just start swatting away all the buffs, being like, I actually don't care about your gimmick, I'm just going to remove all the buffs entirely. It gives her that nice kind of tech appeal that you can be like, oh, I have Summer Osakabehime, I can actually use her for this fight. It makes her really neat to use. The only thing to really remember with this skill is that she does hit one of the enemies with a taunt status. What that means is that whatever enemy you're locked onto, when you pop this skill, you will only be able to attack that enemy for 3 turns. Now, this doesn't really matter if you're Osakabehime herself, because she has an AoE NP, but do keep in mind, let's say you're doing something where you're doing a team comp like Osakabehime, Merlin, and maybe you have like Ozymandias, right? Just insert some single target buster DPS. It would affect them because they would only be able to attack the taunted enemy. So keep in mind, if you're bringing her to like some challenge quest or boss battle, make sure you target the boss so any of your single target guys aren't going to be affected, right? You want to make sure about that. It does limit her for some challenge quests as well. If you guys remember, like some of the different Nero Fest or Gil Fest things, they have specific orders in which you want to be able to take out enemies, or some of the quests, like say the Hassan quest, where you want to be able to take out specific enemies at different times, right? You're like, oh, that one's low, I want to take that one out before he does something. If you start taunting the wrong people, it can maybe get a little bit dicey. There's, again, ways around it, but just keep that in mind if you want to use her for some of that content. But overall, very, very good for the charisma. Very good for giving the entire party that Pierce Evasion status for 3 turns. And again, it's on a low 5-turn cooldown. And then finally, we have her third skill, and this is just a good skill. It gives her a 30% buff to her arts and buster cards, which is very good. You guys may recall earlier on in the video when we were talking about her arts cards and the triple arts deck that she has. This is actually really good because this is going to be buffing the NP gain and the damage of those arts cards. And this is also going to buff the buster performance with the buster side of this skill, which helps out the damage of her NP. And unfortunately, this is kind of one of the unfortunate things about her hits, is that she only has the one buster card. So when the buster cards do come around, yes, this will help out her buster face cards for some buster crits, but you're not going to be seeing it as often because she's only got the one. But again, still very good for when you do see the occasional buster card and you want to do just one really big monstrous crit. It can help out with the damage for that. because as far as Osakabehime is concerned, while the NP damage isn't the greatest, you're supposed to supplement that with her support ability and with her own ability to do some pretty good crits, because keep in mind, none of her crit stuff is actually tied to Buster cards specifically, so you can actually get some pretty nice arts crits going as well. And again, those arts crits would actually result in more NP back, so you know, not only are you going to be hitting them pretty hard with some big crits, but you also get a lot of your NP back. But speaking of the NP, the main function of this is to be kind of like an AoE mop-up type thing. It doesn't do a whole lot of damage, but it's supposed to kind of mop up some of the other mobs that may be hanging around the main boss or something. It's at least good enough to do stuff like that. And then it's also going to, on overcharge, increase the entire party's Buster performance by 20% for 3 turns, and their critical damage by 30% for 3 turns. And you guys do know that I have been saying the Buster meta is actually kind of primed to take advantage of overcharge effects. So every time I see a Buster servant, I think about the Koyenskaya pairings, I think about Morgan, I think about Himiko, all of these Buster support type servants that are really good in team comps because they also have just randomly overcharge gimmicks just thrown into their kit where they're like, oh, and by the way, I'm just going to charge up everybody's overcharge stage by 1 or 2, depending on which servant you're using, obviously. So keep in mind, if you want to take advantage of Osakabehime as like a pseudo DPS type servant, you could actually see her getting up to like 30% Buster for the entire party and 40% crit damage for the entire party. Both are pretty good. Also, do keep in mind that after she fires her NPs, she essentially has a Buster mana burst because of the 20% on NP plus the 30% on skill. The only just real unfortunate thing is that this does not proc first, because that means she's missing out on that initial burst of damage, and it would actually help out her NP damage a little bit. As you guys can see on the chart, her NP1 damage, she's like low 15k. If she got that extra 20%, she'd actually on average be like 17.5k. Still not anything super crazy, right? She's still not like higher than Emiya or anything, but it still would help her out a little bit. It would make her look a little bit better. So here's to hoping that maybe they buff her NP in the future. They allow the Buster thing to activate first, plus the NP buff, which would buff the damage of the NP, and then maybe, I don't know, throw like a 10% NP damage buff her way as well. That also procs first. Maybe just something like that. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think about Osakabehime Archer. She's a servant I'm very excited to test out. She's one of those more mid-range servants that's not apparently broken and has a lot of flaws kind of built into her, but that makes her very, very fun to use. So no one's out here saying she's the most broken servant of all time, but I'm really looking forward to getting some time to use her because I've seen some people use her. She looks really fun to use. Already thinking of some team comps I want to try out with her. Predominantly, I'm wanting to do something like a Merlin, Osakabehime, and then just some DPS single target guy. I'm trying to see how that's going to work. But yeah, she alongside Carmilla are very good consolation prizes if you're also summoning for Berserker Musashi, or you're just like me and you had to go absolutely balls deep for Berserker Musashi and you ended up with NP2 of both of them. So now you're just like, hey dude, I get to try out how these servants function as well, man. But with all that being said, again, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Always love reading the comments and what you guys think about these servants. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, as we do that daily FGO content. We are on that grind to 20k. Then after 20k, a million. After a million, who knows? Maybe I'll become president of the United Nations, alright? I mean, that's kind of in line with FGO, right? You know, just a bunch of different heroes from a bunch of different countries. UN is basically just like IRL FGO, right? But anyway, with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys, have yourselves a nice day. Peace. Late, guys.